Welcome to AI Peer Review, the show that gives you the shortcut to understanding the latest and deepest research in AI.
Today, we're diving deep into an effort from Metafair that really takes aim at maybe the biggest hurdle in code generation right now, the semantic gap.
Right, we talk about this a lot, models spitting out code that looks okay, syntactically
Yeah,
fine,
looks perfect.
but functionally,
Yeah.
maybe not so much.
Mhm.
What did Metafair see as the fundamental thing they had to fix?
So basically what it comes down to is this. Standard LLMs, when they're trained, they get really good at syntax, predicting the next bit of code,
Okay.
but they don't really learn the execution semantics. They don't quite grasp the dynamic environment underneath, what the code actually does when you run it.
Okay, so that missing piece, that inability to kind of simulate the execution, that's why getting reliable code is still so tricky.
Exactly. And that's where the Code World Model, or CWM, comes in.
CWM.
It's a new open weights model, 32 billion parameters, and it's specifically designed to inject that, operational understanding using what they call world modeling.
World modeling for code. Interesting.
And it's not just about the parameter count. What's really telling is the massive context size they trained it with, up to 131,000 tokens.
Yeah, 131K. That's huge.
It really is. And it signals they think the key isn't just scale, but also memory, understanding the long-range connections in code.
Makes sense. So that's our mission for this deep dive. Let's unpack this unique training approach, especially that huge context, and see how CWM actually performs on some really tough coding benchmarks.
Okay, so world modeling for code. The basic idea is to really get good at coding, an LLM needs to understand the underlying dynamical systems.
Dynamical systems, meaning?
Meaning how executing a line of code actually changes things, like the state of local variables. A human programmer just knows this happens. CWM needs to learn to simulate that internal change explicitly.
And what's really interesting here, I think, is when they did this, they built this capability during a dedicated mid-training phase.
Yeah, that's crucial.
Not just as a final fine-tuning step, right?
Yeah.
This was deep in the process. 5 trillion tokens using that massive 131K context.
Exactly. It's about grounding the model's understanding of execution much, much earlier, making it more fundamental.
So how did they actually teach it this world model? What kind of data did they use in that mid-training?
They use two really distinct, powerful data sources to create what they call observation-action trajectory.
Observation action.
Yeah.
Okay, what's source number one?
Source one gets down to the micro level. Python execution traces. Basically, they created data that acts like neural code interpretation.
How does that work?
Well, they collected a ton of data, over 120 million traced Python functions. For the model, the action is the specific line of Python code being executed.
Right.
And the observation is what happens right after the state of the local variables, the stack frame metadata, usually structured as like JSON. So by training CWM on these pairs, see this state, execute this line, predict the next state, they're directly teaching it the step-by-step semantics of the program.
And I noticed they use specific custom tokens like FrameSep and ActionSep.
Yeah.
Why was that necessary? Couldn't they just use, standard text separators?
Good question. Those custom tokens give the model a really clear, unambiguous signal. It tells it, okay, now you're predicting a state, or now you're predicting the next action.
So it reinforces the structure.
Exactly. It hammers home that this isn't just text prediction. It's predicting a sequence of state changes. It helps build that internal representation that code execution is this structured, dynamic process.
Oh, that makes sense for simulating the inside of a function.
Yeah.
What about the bigger picture, the second data source?
Right. So the second source zooms out. It's called the forager agent data.
Forager agent.
This involved training CWM on about 3 million trajectories from interactions within Dockerized software engineering environments. Much bigger scale, think entire repositories.
So not just simulating variables changing, but teaching the model how to actually act in a complex software environment.
Right.
Like using tools, editing files.
Precisely. The tasks were things like synthetic mutate fix problems, where they deliberately introduce a bug and the model had to fix it, and also real-world issue fix tasks from actual GitHub issues.
Okay.
And the actions here are higher level, things like shell commands, file edits, the stuff a developer actually does.
So putting this agentic data together with the detailed execution traces during mid-training, that sounds like a powerful combination for building a robust understanding before you even get to fine-tuning.
That's the idea. Shape that internal representation early and comprehensively.
Okay, so a model designed to juggle all that dynamic state information across a 131K token window. That sounds computationally intense. What's going on inside that 32 billion parameter architecture to make that feasible?
Yeah, they definitely needed some smart engineering. They used something called an interleaved sliding window attention pattern.
Interleave sliding window. Okay, break
Oh.
that down.
Think of it like the model can sort of zoom in and zoom out. It alternates between local attention blocks and global ones.
How did that work?
You get three local blocks in a row, each focusing on maybe 8,000 tokens. That's for the fine-grained detail. Then one global attention block connects everything across the full 131,000 token context.
So it keeps the big picture in view while mostly focusing locally.
Exactly. It's a really clever way to get that long-range coherence without the massive compute cost of having every layer look at everything all the time. Big savings.
And I bet handling that huge context also needed special positional encoding.
You bet. They use scaled rope E, that's rotary positional embedding, but with a pretty aggressive scale factor, 16, and they started using that right from the mid-training phase.
So the long context wasn't an afterthought. It was baked into the design from pretty early on.
Absolutely fundamental. Then, after pre-training and that crucial world modeling mid-training, they moved into the more standard post-training stages. Supervised fine-tuning, SFT, and then the joint reinforcement learning stage.
Right, the RL phase. They use GRPO, Group Relative Policy Optimization. But you mentioned a modified version. Why the modification? Was it about handling those long, multi-step coding tasks?
That's exactly it. Standard GRPO is often better for like single-turn Q&A, but for complex, multi-step things, coding, math problems, agentic tasks, errors can pile up.
Yeah.
You need more stability across the whole sequence.
But how did they modify it?
The key thing was using the total return, the cumulative reward, across the whole trajectory, not just the final reward, when calculating the advantage.
So it looks at the whole journey, not just the destination.
Precisely. Gives a better signal.
Yeah.
They also did a couple of other tweaks, like removing length normalization so it doesn't accidentally favor shorter, maybe incomplete solutions. And they skipped training on trajectories where the model didn't really improve, the zero advantage ones, just to be more efficient.
Okay, that makes sense for stabilizing the RL. Now, there's also this method called agentic self-bootstrapping. Sounds intriguing, like the model teaching itself.
Yeah, it's pretty clever. They found that the initial model, even after SFT, struggled a bit with the strict formatting needed for complex tasks, like the SWU benchmark. It would generate solutions that were conceptually okay, but, like, formatted incorrectly.
Okay.
So they set up this loop. The RL model would generate attempts or traces to solve problems. Then they'd filter those attempts using rejection sampling, keeping only the high-quality, successful ones.
And then feed those good examples back.
Exactly. Feed those clean, successful, correctly formatted traces back into the SFT dataset for another round of fine-tuning.
That's a really smart way to iteratively improve the instruction data using the model's own output. Did they say how much difference that made?
A massive difference. They noted that before this bootstrapping loop, the SFT model basically couldn't solve any SWE bench issues correctly, mostly due to formatting errors. After adding these bootstrap traces, the SFT model's success rate jumped to 43% pass at 1. So it wasn't just a small tweak. It was critical for teaching the model how to follow the complex instructions and output formats needed, which then gave the RL phase a much better starting point.
All right, so all this complex training, the world modeling, the bootstrapping, does it actually translate into strong performance? What about general coding ability outside these super complex agentic stuff?
Yeah, it seems the core architecture and training are solid generally. CWM scored pretty well, 68.6% pass at 1 on Live Code Bench LCB v5.
That's respectable.
And it did really well on math, actually, 96.6% on the Math 500 dataset.
Yeah.
So that suggests the large context and the overall training help even beyond just the world modeling aspect.
Okay, but the real test, the place where that world modeling should make the difference, is in those agentic tasks, like SW Bench Verified.
Right. And this is where CWM posts its most impressive result, 65.8% pass at 1 on SWE Bench Verified.
65.8% pass at 1 on SWE Bench. That's very strong. Now, you mentioned they use test time scaling, TTS, to get that score.
Yes, that's important context. TTS usually means generating multiple possible solutions at test time and picking the best one, often via some scoring mechanism, so that 65.8% reflects that strategy.
Got it. Still, even with TTS, that score puts it right up there, competitive with some much larger, often closed-weight models, right?
Absolutely. It really highlights the effectiveness of their training approach, getting that level of performance from a 32B parameter open model.
And can we see that agentic reasoning in action? like how it uses the world model.
Yeah, the paper has examples, like in Figure 4. It shows CWM tackling competitive programming problems. It doesn't just write code, it generates an initial solution, then it actually constructs its own tests input-output pairs to check if the solution is correct.
Wow, it generates its own test cases.
Yeah, and then it predicts how its code would execute against those tests.
Hmm.
It's essentially simulating the whole debugging and validation loop internally. That's the world model in action.
That's really cool. But how do we know for sure that it was the world modeling data, those execution traces, that specifically boosted this agentic performance? Could it just be the scale or the agent data?
They tackled that directly with ablation studies. They trained versions of the model with different data combinations.
And the results?
The results showed that the best performance came from combining both the Python execution traces and the Forage agent data. Removing either one hurt performance, especially on the agentic SWE bench tasks. The combination specifically improved things like negative log likelihoods on SWE bench.
Okay, hang on. Improving negative log likelihood, NLL. What does that practically mean here? Why is that significant for agentic tasks?
Right, good point. Lower NLL means the model is more confident, more accurate in predicting the correct sequence of tokens. For a long, multi-step agentic task, that means it's better at predicting the right sequence of commands, code edits, file operations needed to actually solve the problem.
So it's not just getting the final answer right more often, it's actually more sure-footed along the way, more internally consistent about the process.
Exactly. It suggests the model has a better internal grasp of the dynamics of the task, not just pattern matching the final code.
Makes sense. And
Yeah.
did they measure how accurately it could do that low-level state prediction the core trace following?
They did. They ran a specific execution trace prediction analysis. This is the direct check. Can it actually predict the variable changes step by step? The results were pretty stunning, actually. On function-level data, it achieved 100.0% accuracy in following the required trace format,
Perfect format adherence.
and 97.9% accuracy on predicting the exact key and value changes in the program state. So it's incredibly reliable at simulating that step-by-step execution in its head.
Almost perfect simulation.
Okay.
And finally, does this grounded step-by-step understanding translate to higher-level reasoning, like analyzing code complexity?
It seems to. They tested it on Big O Bench, which is all about predicting and generating Big O time complexity.
Mhm.
And CWM outperformed the baseline models pretty clearly across the board on predicting and generating time complexity. That's a strong sign. It's not just simulating execution, but connecting those semantics to higher-level algorithmic properties. Hashtag tag outro.
Okay, so pulling this all together,
Mhm.
what's the big takeaway here? It feels like CWM really makes a strong case for this world modeling approach. Introducing that explicit execution tracing, especially during mid-training, seems key to bridging the gap between just predicting code and actually understanding it.
I think that's right. CWM feels like a significant step, moving beyond just syntax towards a more grounded understanding of what programs do. Now, it's worth remembering this is currently a research-only model.
Right, non-commercial license.
Yeah, and there are obvious next steps. Expanding this tracing idea to other languages beyond Python is a big one.
Sure.
And also figuring out how to leverage this world knowledge even more effectively for things like planning complex tasks or improving zero-shot reasoning.
So lots more research potential. But just thinking about that core capability, that near-perfect execution tracing, where could that ultimately lead?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, potentially transformative. Because the model can predict state changes so accurately, it lays the groundwork for something like a neural debugger.
A neural debugger. Okay, unpack that. How would that be different from the debuggers we use now?
Think about it. Traditional debuggers mostly let you step through code after it runs or as it runs to see state. But a neural debugger, built on something like CWM's world model,
Could potentially predict things before they happen.
exactly. It might be able to predict, say, what inputs would cause the program to reach a specific error state, or even predict if a program will terminate without running it all the way through. And maybe the coolest idea,
Yeah.
because it has internally mapped out the execution sequence and state changes, it could theoretically jump to predict the state at any future line of code almost instantly, just by simulating the necessary steps internally, not actually executing them one by one.
Wow. Like time travel for debugging. That capability for active predictive simulation, really moving AI beyond just code completion towards genuine computational reasoning. That feels like a huge challenge and opportunity for the field.
Absolutely. It's about grounding language models in the actual semantics of execution. That's the frontier.
Well, that is definitely a provocative thought to end on.
And that wraps up our deep dive into Metafair's Code World model.
Thanks for joining us on AI Peer Review. We'll catch you next time with more cutting-edge research.